Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, I have Danny Haiphong with me for a second time, for those of you who've been my subscriber for a very long time. But there's a little bit of a change. Now he is, well, he always was an independent journalist, but now you've kind of gone full time, haven't you?
Yeah, I was able to make this move, and it's a pretty exciting one, that's for sure.
Nice. Yeah. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about that, first of all, and a brief introduction by yourself. But then we're going to talk a little bit about the anti China propaganda, what changes you've been noticing, and a few other things we've seen come up online. So, first of all, how about we start with, for people who aren't familiar with you, a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, some of you who have followed Daniel Dumber for a while may know me from our conversation about racism. That's one of the subjects that I cover pretty deeply in my journalism work. And what I do for Black Agenda Report, I also write for CGTN and other publications, is I make connections between racism, propaganda, and the US's, because I live in the United States, born in the United States. I pay close attention to the US's endless war drives, which these ventures, these imperialist ventures, seemingly never end. And now we are in a very dangerous situation with China. And I was very lucky. Sometimes I joke and I say I was not lucky enough to not plan my travels better to be in China when the virus began. But I was in China right before coronavirus, now known as COVID-19, was discovered. And I was able to be there for 2.5 weeks and kind of see with my own eyes how US propaganda has led us to this very dangerous situation where so many Americans, so many Westerners are being led to believe that China is their enemy. And so I've done a lot of work over the course of the last few years. I had you on, Daniel, for our Friends of Socialist China event, which that's another publication that I co-edit with a few comrades in London, Carlos Martinez and Keith Bennett. And so I kind of have my hands in a lot of different areas. I write for Black Agenda Report nearly weekly. I publish a podcast on YouTube called The Left Lens. So you should definitely subscribe to that. And I also co-edit Friends of Socialist China, and I was one of the co-founders of the No Cold War campaign. So that's kind of sums up what I am up to, and I will be doing a lot more of this now that I have more time to do so. So thank you so much again, Daniel, for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, the Cold War is, the Cold War topic is something of great interest for me, especially to see how it's evolved. Because there were a lot of people in the beginning when guys like us were talking about how this is getting kind of dangerous. Um, this is really, there is a chance this could turn into a war, and when we started saying stuff like that, there weren't many people that would take that seriously. They'd be like, "Ah, you're crazy. There's no chance that could happen." But we're seeing a shift where more and more people are like, "You know what? This might actually be true. This might actually happen." And what's interesting is people have split into two different categories. Well, I'm sure there's more than just two categories, but you've got people who are like, "Oh, okay, maybe we need to be a bit more measured with this approach. Maybe we should kind of tame this down a little bit." And then you got the other um, group of people who have inevitably fallen into a category that has always been needed to make these wars possible, where they start justifying it, saying, "Well, you know what? Somebody's got to stand up. Somebody's got to do this. There's all this stuff." And then they list off all the propaganda talking points, whether it be about Xinjiang, Taiwan, and all these things, and trying to convince themselves, saying, "We need to go into this battle," ready to repeat the same mistakes they've made over and over and over again. Um, but we've seen, I think we were talking a little bit beforehand where how you're going to mention how things have changed a little bit under Biden, but I'll just say up front, I feel like with Trump, at least it was way more transparent. Everything was
Mm.
on the surface. I feel like with Biden, it is just as dangerous, but far more sinister, a little bit more under the surface. Assad once said that Trump was the best president he could ever hope for, because what more could you want than a transparent foe, a transparent enemy? When he said he was coming to Syria, he said very clearly, "We're coming for the oil." But how about you give us your perspective on that and how you've seen the propaganda evolve?
Sure. So One thing that's important to note. So I, independently, I run a blog, patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. And that's where people financially support me. And they send me messages asking me this very exact question. Ask me, how do we confront the fact that there is a difference between when there's a Democratic Party administration in power in the United States versus a Republican Party administration. So under Donald Trump, uh, what we saw, what I think we could call it, to paraphrase Barack Obama when he was running in 2008, he said that George Bush was waging dumb wars. And so China was sort of Donald Trump's dumb war in the sense that he and his administration pushed the envelope so far, especially rhetorically, because we don't even talk about policy, but rhetorically, pushed the envelope so far that it led us to this moment, July 2020, when there were warships being sent to the South China Sea, and then all of the various escalations that happened afterward, the closing of the consulate in Houston. We can go on and on the sanctions on big tech, the sanctions on Chinese tech, on Huawei, the ongoing persecution of Meng Wanzhou. Salute that she is now free. But we can go on and on about all the examples of Donald Trump's uh, push to really try to corner China. It didn't work in so many ways. And actually, the trade war that began in 2017, 2018 was really counterproductive because U.S. corporations were hurt mightily by that, and many investors in the U.S. investors just ignored it and did not take it seriously. And so Joe Biden, right, he comes in with this build back better mantra. And what he's done is he's done what a lot of Democratic Party administrations do. They sort of sanitize war, projects of war, ventures of war, under the guise of human rights, under the guise of things that are more palatable, like competition, for example, like democracy versus autocracy is what he will often talk about. And this has allowed Joe Biden to actually push a lot of things forward, and even in terms of this new Cold War, and even as the U.S., there's been many different instances of dialogue that has opened up since Meng Wanzhou was free. Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, since she was freed from house arrest that the U.S. Was basically using Canada as a proxy to pursue. There's been a lot of talks that have opened up between the United States and China. His trade representative, Catherine Tai, has spoken to Chinese envoy. The Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, after a really embarrassing encounter in Anchorage, Alaska, in March. This past month, he had a much more cordial meeting with the top Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi. But even as that was happening, the Central Intelligence Agency was declaring that it's shifting its entire focus to China, that it was going to close mission centers opened up by the Trump administration under the leadership of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mission centers that were focused on Iran and the DPRK are now going to close in order to open two new ones that are focused on China. One focused directly on China, how to make China a more spyable place. That's basically what William Burns, the director of the CIA, framed it as. And then also one that's focused on tech and all of these other areas of so-called competition with China, climate change, public health, that sort of thing. So basically, the CIA is saying that China is now going to be the focus. And that, I think, demonstrates this shift in the form of the new Cold War. It continues, but now it is going to be more covert, more professional, more palatable to larger sections of the US population. Even though we could say under Donald Trump, a lot of people from across the political spectrum were taken even by uh, this very hostile rhetoric that Donald Trump uses. I think Joe Biden is attempting to capitalize on that momentum and do it in his own way so the political consequences are not as high down the road.
Right. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people who hear this stuff, sometimes it's good to zoom out and talk about motive. Why is the U.S. doing this? And we shared a panel together, and I spoke a little bit about my opinions on that. How it's really multifaceted. I mean, this is a power that's challenging the U.S. global hegemony. It could finally introduce true multilateralism. Multilateralism. With Europe and the UK and the US together, is not real, true multilateralism. They go in and they destroy the same countries, whether it's Libya, Iraq, or all these different places. There is no balance in this world, and China could eventually become that balance. They also are making inroads into places in the global south, where these countries are choosing to deal with China. And then obviously there is a condescending element where the media wants you to believe that these countries don't have agency of their own. They're making a big mistake. And the U.S. has to come in with this $300 million per year plan to make anti-China propaganda. They were recently exposed in Zimbabwe paying $1,000 per article, negative anti-China article. Like this is pretty crazy. And I guess the other thing too, the ironic thing for me, which I highlighted in that talk, was that the U.S. has a lot of problems right now domestically. It is incredibly divided. Like, I mean, it looks like the ingredients are there for kind of pre-Civil War type stuff, with how divided the country is. And an enemy, an outside enemy, has always been a great unifier. So there's so many benefits. Smashing China back down protects U.S. corporate interests abroad. And then also it deflects domestic attention away from the problems at home, often caused by those same corporations, abroad. It's like a double win. I don't know if you want to, obviously I went into a little bit more detail than that in the talk, but I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the dynamics of the motive and what's going on behind the scenes.
Oh, for sure. Well, for one, the United States, as you mentioned, is in this state of crisis, and in many ways, the society is collapsing. And this has been something that has been decades in the making. The United States' overall share of the world economy once was nearly half, if not more than half, of the entire world economy, is now shrinking to the point where China, in real GDP terms, which given the currency differences and where China was versus where the United States was just 2-3 decades ago, China is set to overtake in real GDP terms in the next 10 to 15 years the United States. So that in and of itself, that alone has sounded off intense alarm bells in the bipartisan foreign policy establishment in the United States. This is a huge problem. And for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, China is strong and China is stable. And the United States and its allies, whether we're talking about the UK or Canada or Australia, don't really have this kind of stability right now. And so they don't really have much to offer those countries which have historically suffered under their influence or outright domination via colonialism or neocolonialism. I think this is a part of this so-called great power competition that both Donald Trump and now Joe Biden champion. They champion this kind of competition because they really do fear that, and their fears are legitimate, that China will inevitably have a strong advantage when it comes to trade, mutual relations, cooperation, dialogue, all kinds of relations with the global south. And that because China is so stable and because China is growing so quickly, that eventually this will lead to a total undermining of the US's economic sphere of influence everywhere. And this includes Europe, this includes Africa, this includes Latin America, everywhere. And I think that's why you see the United States, although it's not talked about so much in the media, the United States' major focus and major point of investment is militarily against China. That's often not talked about enough, in the sense that China is always the one framed as the aggressor by the US and Western media. But if people knew the scale, the amount, near more than half of all of the US's investments in its military, which its military is bigger than the next 11 countries combined, are directed at China. That's a categorical fact. And that's only growing, especially now with this new hyping up of the Taiwan Strait issue.
Right, right. Yeah, no, for sure. And it's a real pity that with this shift, that it didn't become a catalyst for introspection, for adjustment, for you know competing, because this is what they're always talking about is fair competition. Well, if these countries in the global south are choosing to deal with China, offer something better. Come to the table with something better. And if you're going to continually insult China's options in Africa and say that it's debt trap diplomacy, much of which has been debunked by many people, um, how much worse does your options have to be that they're still choosing China? And it reminds me of a speech that somebody gave from an African, a few months before Gaddafi was murdered. And Hillary Clinton celebrated that on live TV before um, destroying one of Africa's richest countries that was looking at unifying Africa, that was looking at creating a resource-backed central currency that was responsible for putting Africa's first communications satellite into outer space, reducing the need to pay 500 million euros per year to use the satellite tools from outside, completely destroying these countries. And he said he was laughing through that. And he says, you know what? And you're telling us not to deal with China. And he laughed and he said, what can China do to us that you haven't already done to us? What if we don't deal with China? What are you going to give us in return other than bombs and drones, and destroying our countries and assassinating our leaders? And that's a valuable question that people really need to ask. And I think that's why it's really important that some of this propaganda is really directed towards the global south to convince them that they're making the wrong choice. And it's a shame. It's like, this could have been, finally, there are two options in the market for these countries, for these global south countries. I don't necessarily want either side to win, but the prospect of both of them competing and offering something better to these countries is exciting. Even if the U.S. is the one that wins out, even if this is what forced them to provide better options. And I don't know if you saw, there's all kinds of little pieces of propaganda. Some are more direct and obvious, like the $1,000 per article in Zimbabwe to write
Right.
anti-China articles, but that recent thing with the movie poster plays into it also, trying to
Yes.
convince everybody that China doesn't like black people, and they erase them from the poster. I don't think that was on our list, but I've got some screenshots
No.
and stuff like that. I don't know if
Yeah. Yeah.
you want to
Definitely
talk
pull
about
it
that.
up. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's do it. Definitely pull it up because it came and went very fast because you had our good friend Winston, what's his name, Sturzel, and
Sturzel, yeah.
The China Africa project. They were harping on this, and then even Sturzel had to roll it back because it came and went so fast because the evidence was so clear that no, in China, the Dune movie posters were indeed inclusive of the African actress who plays in the film, and many of them are just translated versions of the ones used in the West. And uh, this is a very common thing that the United States and the West have done to China, but also in other countries like Cuba, for example. You'll see this circulating in the New York Times. You'll see these accusations that Cuba is actually really racist towards its Afro-Cuban population, and it's a way to sort of try to build sympathy among those who are liberal or to the left of liberal who have strong feelings about racism and who understand it very well from their own context, but have no idea, no clue what goes on in China. They don't know anything that happens in Cuba. They don't know the history. They don't understand the relationship between the United States and these countries. So they end up projecting their own values and their own understandings onto the perceived enemies. And so this is exactly what happened here, where, yeah, this Dune poster was circulating online, and you had these hacks attempt to claim that China is racist because they airbrushed the African actress. And not only did it not happen, but it's something that we hear all of the time about China. And we hear, and for the folks who talk about it, they never talk about racism in their own countries, but they love to talk about it when they're kind of making it up out of whole cloth with regard to those countries that are targeted by the United States.
Absolutely. I think it's worth mentioning too, when you talk about projecting their values onto others, what's very important to note too is they are values on which are issues that they haven't even fixed themselves at home, racial equality and things like that. So even if you were to believe the propaganda at face value, what are you doing spending your time trying to fix this issue in what you consider to be an inflexible dictatorship when you are living in a democratic society where you're supposed to have the power to make positive change? And then, even more ironically, you want to export your political system elsewhere when you haven't even proven that you can use it and the power, the so-called power you're supposed to have, to fix the very issues that you're virtue signaling others on. I think this is the really important point. That is, it's absurd that people can be convinced to expend so much energy on this stuff abroad, even if it was real. And it's not real. The stuff that they're being fed is not real. But even if you were to take it at face value, it's like, what are you doing here, really? Like, is this really, does this make sense at all? So I think that's important to note too. But this might take a little bit of time. But this is actually, the poster situation is so valuable because we've seen the beginning, the middle, the end. Somewhat people are still retweeting it as almost as if it's fact. There are still news agencies retweeting it, but that's also a valuable part of it, showing that the damage is done when the rumor goes out. There's no coming back from that after. When Niall Ferguson put out the rumor that China was allowing international flights out of Wuhan, it got thousands and thousands of retweets. When he put his retraction out, which has since been deleted from his blog also, it got like just a handful of retweets. The damage is already done. So this is an absolutely perfect example to show this is how the propaganda works. These are the kinds of people pushing it. And this is kind of the life cycle of it. So with that in mind, let's see what I got here. I've loaded some stuff up here. How about we start with a short clip of Winston, where the original lie came from. I think that might be a good starting point. So let me see if I can load that video here. So Winston Sturgill, as you mentioned, is now he somewhat retracted while doubling down and putting a separate lie out, because what he actually does on a regular basis is he tries to get away with falsehoods, but there was way too much backlash from this that he had to say something, especially when he started digging a hole for himself, where he started patronizing other black. There was a black Canadian he went after, calling the black Canadian racist and saying, no, we're all African. And he just dug himself a hole, which he could not get out of. But let's see here. Hold on a second. Let me see if this
as to how this got into the Chinese market. We were like looking at this poster and we were like, they are definitely going to change this movie poster. So what did we do? We went to Baidu and we looked it up.
Yeah, so on Baidu we searched the Dune poster, and yeah, let's get us out of there. Notice there's something's missing.
Someone's missing from that poster.
Who could it be?
I don't know. Could it be the black woman?
I think it's the black.
Notice they never look up names when they're talking about like Maori people. It's always like the woman, the chin woman, because she's got a chin tattoo, or the black woman, while trying to virtue signal and say that they show respect to this community. Let's keep that in mind as well.
Person, yes. Let's go back. She's clearly there. Okay, you can see her. She's obviously
probably a main character.
She is currently in that poster, but in the Chinese poster, whoa, there's no black person in the poster.
Oh, I'm so surprised. What a surprise.
Anyway, it's just China pulling a China again.
Yep.
Because I guess they're worried that if people see a black person, they're not going to want to go see the movie or something.
John.
So that was actually from Brian Berletic's video. He did a really great breakdown. He was one of the earliest people to look into that. But that's it. Put it out like that. Let everybody see it. And of course, as you know, that was not the truth. That is an international available poster. You can see it here on IMDb in English. And it just happens to be one of the many posters available, just like with every single movie that has ever come out. And as a matter of fact, China, for the most part, used this poster with Sharon present. Mm-hmm. There we go again. I went down to my theater here. I live above a shopping mall. I went down, same thing. It's this one, and it was absolutely false. And so, if you want to add anything, and as I'm going through these, got a few screenshots I'm going to post here. You go ahead.
Well,
But,
I think it just shows how disingenuous these accusations are, that there's no kernel of truth to them. It really is about jumping on the anti-China bandwagon. It's very lucrative. I mean, there's a large audience for this, and those guys know it very well, because they basically made their living off of bashing China and promoting some of the most vile xenophobia that you can find on the internet. So I think that really it just forms the basis of all of these ridiculous characterizations that come up, and they seem to come up. We seem to get this. It seems to be, if not a daily thing, it's at the very least a weekly thing, where there's another story, another hot point, another kind of exploitative attempt to jump on this bandwagon for both personal and political gain.
Right. Absolutely. So now let's see how it propagates from there. So, of course, the next big one to then repeat the lie. And I believe by this point, a lot of people had come out and said, what the hell are you talking about? But the China Africa Project, without doing any due diligence whatsoever, put this out. The Chinese version of the movie poster for Dune removed actress Sharon Duncan Brewster, one of the film's main characters, who is also black. This is reminiscent of John Boyega being airbrushed out of the Chinese poster for Star Wars, The Force Awakens. That's something we'll get to in a moment also. But then I replied to that this was actually just recently featured on RT News. They picked up this tweet. I said, no, they didn't. That is one of the many posters made by the studio and used in the West as well. But as a matter of fact, China is mostly using the version with Sharon present. You could have very easily verified this on your own. And then so I got into a little bit of a discussion with this outlet, and I got some mixed responses afterwards saying that these guys are usually good or something like that. But I can't help but be really suspicious after this exchange, and I'll show you what happened. So somebody first pointed out that they're funded by the German government and the Ford Foundation, and then drew some troubling or concerning connections, which may or may not have relevance, but whatever, put it out there. So I said, I'm following them, and they actually follow me too. I'm mutual followers of the China Africa Project. I can't remember for what, but they must have produced something good. If they won't be issuing a correction, I'll be unfollowing them, as it's an obvious disinfo publication, and I don't want to get caught citing them mistakenly thinking otherwise. And so they respond, I'm not sure a correction is needed in this case, given there do appear to be multiple versions of the poster available in the market, some with her on it and others not. From Baidu, here's one without her, and here's one with her. It's like, come on, this is really disingenuous. Yeah. This is not a Chinese version of the Dune poster with Sharon removed. This is literally the exact same artwork available in the West. Furthermore, as you can see in your replies, is one of the least used versions provided by the studio, yet you still don't see any issue with your post. And then, no, I didn't say removed. I just mentioned that it didn't have her in it, and it appears that the studio in China is just doing the same thing in China that is doing in other markets where it has multiple versions of the poster with various characters featured, which is now it's already completely different from what their original poster was. But remember, let's see this. He said, no, I didn't say removed. No, you literally said removed. So at this point, I think they're being kind of, disingenuous. And they said, sure, but as the discussion evolved, I also clearly stated on multiple occasions that there were multiple versions of the poster in the market. This is a fruitful discussion, so I don't want to delete the tweet, but I did update my assessment through the discussion. So, in other words, you won't issue a correction, follow-up, or tweet or appended tweet clarifying your erroneous claim, which got a headline tweet and is still being retweeted by folks who aren't digging through the replies to find you've somewhat begun to walk back on your claim. Now, this is important. I looked through their history. Usually when they get things wrong, they delete the original tweet and then they repost it. And they also reply saying, we got this one wrong, we're sorry, but they didn't do that on that. What they eventually did after this conversation, and I laid into them saying, this is a really suspicious outlet. And some of my followers replied saying, no, you know what? they're actually usually pretty good. They debunk a lot of the China debt trap rumors and stuff like that. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know if this is one of those outlets that they throw you a bone once in a while, but then there's some really important disinformation they put out there, like Bellingcat. That doesn't necessarily make sense, because one of the most important things for these kind of nefarious organizations to do is undermine China and African relations, which they were kind of doing with this original tweet. But what they ended up doing after I kind of pressured them was they made a new tweet and clarified that, okay, you know what, here's some clarifications, but left the original tweet up as a self-contained tweet. And then finally, they did delete the original tweet, but then they deleted the clarification also, and pretending like it never happened. So very disingenuous and very damaging, because then the Daily Mail began to repost it and even quoted the China Africa project. The Times reposted their tweet also, because there's no evidence on their timeline anymore that they retracted this. And then we had big accounts retweeting it, like Geeks and Gamers, are sharing the story now on their platforms. Disclose TV, reposting it also. This one was the most disappointing for me. This is just a small Twitter account, Black and Super, and they promote black superhero characters.
Right.
But then what they did was, when they found out that they were wrong, they started blocking anybody who was posting that, and they were doubling down, tripling down, and starting to, like, through their entire history, you could see them criticizing. They wanted to make this into a criticizing Asians, and you look through their history, they criticize the Stop Asian Hate movement. They say that most Chinese Americans are Republicans and hate us. They come into our communities and disrupt us. So you can see that there's some serious racism issues under there. And it was so disappointing, because here's a person who's trying to uplift one group of marginalized people in America while smashing down another. That was really the most disappointing one for me. There was some sort of a Muslim association that retweeted it. What is this? This is a mission to promote civil rights, and empower
That's a
Muslim
huge
Americans.
one. Yeah,
I mean, these are like
that's an established institution. I mean, they came out and supported Abby Martin when she was being persecuted by the state of Georgia. She was trying to speak at a school there, and they came out and supported her because of the whole anti-BDS sentiment and the influence of Israel and Zionism on academic institutions, trying to stop her from speaking, censoring her. So it's just shocking that CARE would actually come out and support these ludicrous and very damaging lies about racism. I mean, it
ends up promoting racism against Chinese, who they think now don't like black people or people from Africa. And it's so tragic that you've got all of these organizations that are aware of institutionalized racism and the problems with racism that needs to be addressed, getting caught promoting a story from Winston Sturzill, a guy who went on his channel and said that South Africa is not a rainbow nation. It's black, brown, and white people, which, is the literal color of shit. He's an absolute outright racist. He planted this into the market, and then you've got all of these organizations that usually care about racism carrying this rumor planted in the market by this racist.
It's the definition of cringe. I mean, this is the definition of a cringe moment on social media. And the China Africa Project has had they work with Deborah Bottingam, who's very good on. She's the one who's really debunked a lot of the lies about China's role economically in Africa, its relations with African countries. I read her incredible book called The Dragon's Gift, and so I think this is just so discrediting of that institution. And it's a Washington D.C. based institution, and of course I'm sure it's not her that's running the Twitter account. So there is a lot of explaining to do, but any I think any 501c3 that talks about China that's based in Washington D.C. is prone. There's just almost like a tether that if there's the right moment, they'll get pulled into the fray, and so totally shameful. I mean, totally shameful, discrediting.
This organization should be, especially because a lot of these mainstream media outlets are retweeting them, using their original since
Yes.
deleted post to push this story. They should be reaching out to these organizations saying, hey guys, you got this wrong. We had an update. Well, they can't send them the update anymore because they deleted their update. But not only should they still have an update on their timeline, they should be pinning it to the top as this is propagating across the entire world on this scale. But they don't want to do it. I almost feel like there's a little bit of complacency there where they're like,
Yeah.
let it go. That's when you really start to question their intentions. What are they really doing? Like what is actually going on here? Really disappointing.
Yeah.
I'll show something a little bit more entertaining when Winston started digging himself a hole when he started being patronizing towards even black people, saying, hold on a second here. Let's really test your logic here. So Andre, he's from, I believe he's from Toronto, mutual followers with him too. He circles Zendaya, and she is considered black. Well, she's mixed race, but he wanted to kind of test this and see, well, what's going on here? And he says, not the same one. And that's really nice language there. Not the same one. Or can't you tell black people apart? Now keep this in mind. He's telling this to a black person whose both parents are Jamaican. You know, can't you tell black people apart? Then he goes on to say, you referred to a single black actress in your original tweet, not the darker of the two black actresses, bringing us back to the question, is Zendaya Coleman black or not? Everyone is black. We all come from Africa, you disgusting racist. What the? All right.
He didn't bother to scroll through Andre's timeline
or
at
click
all.
on his profile picture. And then so Andre just very calmly says, if everyone is black, would this not negate your claim that the black actress was removed from the poster? And then block. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's sad, but it's comical at the same time. And then so what he did was he posted this is his because he got so much backlash from it. He says, you know, so he basically tries to make excuses for this. If he makes mistakes, he will gladly admit them. No, he doesn't. Usually he doesn't when there's a backlash, and I've got plenty of examples of that. In this case, we jumped the gun. However, this doesn't change the fact that China has already done this in the past. And then they show a traditional Chinese, I believe that's a traditional Chinese poster, one of the Black Panther. And so obviously very easily you could debunk this as well. So, but he's hoping that it's not going to get as much backlash and he can get away with this disinformation, because if you actually went and you searched, you could find that no, there were black people on the Black Panther posters. And if they were so afraid that the Chinese market couldn't take black actresses, were they just putting this actors and actresses, were they putting this out in the market expecting massive disappointment when Chinese people entered the theater and said, oh my goodness, this movie is full of African Americans or people from Africa, black people? Doesn't make any sense. Here we go. There's that one too. And let me see. There was somebody who also, let's see, I've got something else here where we can, let me see if I can grab this video file here. Star Wars poster. So we've got, hold on a second. I got to get this one off the screen. So this is somebody here doing a search online in China to see what is available for the Star Wars poster. And as you can see, there were obviously multiple versions as well. So he's not telling the whole truth there. So this is in China on Baidu. You know, this is how it's blown up since then, and it doesn't show much sign of slowing down. There are people who just really want to believe this or really want to push it, and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous and damaging, and for a lot of people, it's doing exactly what they hope it would do, even in the face of knowing that it's absolutely fabricated.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what is also very striking about all of this is that this kind of laziness, this kind of intellectual laziness, dishonesty, straight up lies and propaganda, racist lies about racism, how ironically, that can really only exist in an atmosphere of war. And I think that's a huge part of this. It harkens back to the 20th century, the mid 20th century, where Americans were literally looking under their desks and under their beds for Soviets. Like that is how primed Americans were for war against communism. And now it's war against China, and Chinese are bad, they're scary, the country is the epitome of evil. I mean, that is, I think, the framework that people who are taken by this, which is a lot of people. I mean, this is a very dangerous and growing trend that's been growing over the last several years of people in the United States and the West being duped and taken for this imperial joyride, this racist imperialist joyride that the establishment wants to go on against China.
Right. Absolutely. And you have some examples also. The anti-China propaganda has been ramping up in different ways as well. But we've got the NBA coming in on it too,
Yes.
with their own angle.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I'm getting some images prepared here while you're talking. But tell us a little bit about that while I'm preparing some stuff here.
All right. Well, let's go into a little bit of context, because this isn't something I've been paying attention since 2019. So in 2019, we had the whole Hong Kong issue, which you have done so much work on and so much incredible work on. So salute to you. But the when the whole Hong Kong controversy was going, the NBA got caught up in that too. And that there were a lot of demands on the NBA to withhold their business, withdraw their business. LeBron James got caught into it. He was being called, there were images of him around in like the Mao portrait. There's all sorts of racist attacks on him and the NBA for doing business in China because of what was happening in Hong Kong, these so-called separatist protests that were backed by the United States. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most supposedly progressive members of Congress, actually tag team with Ted Cruz on a letter that demanded this from the NBA, that said you need to respect human rights and withdraw your business from the NBA. And now, ever since, the NBA has jumped on has been attacked around the whole Uyghur issue, the concentration camp issue, which we don't need to go down the rabbit hole there, but we know that that's another U.S.-sponsored, NED, CIA-sponsored narrative. Now, all of them are being brought into the fray by one gentleman, one very shady, particular NBA player named Enes Kanter, who, I'm a Boston person. I grew up in Boston. He plays for the Celtics. He is of Turkish origin, and his mentor just so happens to be Fethullah Gulen, who, mind you, has a deep relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency. So deep that his so-called Gulen schools of the Hazmat religion, a sect of Islam that he is like a cult leader of, he opened more than 100 schools in the 1990s in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, sheltering CIA agents. I mean, this is how deep, and this is Enes Kanter's mentor. This guy is his mentor. So Enes Kanter came out last week, and he a whole series, all of the issues you can think of. It first came with Tibet, free Tibet, he said. And then it comes.
I saw that. And I was like, when you look at his history, you're like, I think he's going to go on. He's got to go into the Uyghurs, and we'll get onto that in a second. But continue.
Yes, he goes on to the Uyghurs. He also, made issue about the dictator Xi Jinping suppressing, Tiananmen Square and Winnie the Pooh. He comes out with this shoe line, like shoe after shoe after shoe on all of these issues. And of course, the Uyghur so-called genocide issue has also come up. But he has basically made himself the new face of the NBA, of the crusade that's going on around the NBA to try to push NBA players, but really the whole league into the new Cold War. Because, I'm one of the big reasons for this is because the NBA actually has a huge fan base in China and, is deeply connected to China. And so there's a lot of political hand wringing over this. But anyway, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything you want to pull up.
Yeah, I'll share some screenshots. But yeah, that is important when there is something of influence in China. If there is a way for government to weaponize that against the society, whether it be songmakers. You look at the stories of songmakers being weaponized against Cuba, also specifically being to ferment, unrest, or put these different ideas in people's heads, and it has more of an effect on people than a lot of people would like to admit. They like to say, oh well, that's just freedom of information. You should allow that. Why don't you have more trust in people's intelligence? I mean, psychological warfare operations exist, and if the U.S. didn't really appreciate that, the Confucius Institutes, which they keep saying, so they're teaching cultural classes and teaching Mandarin, and they're like, oh, they might be evilly, brainwashing our people. They're okay to shut those down. They all of a sudden appreciate the possibility of people being influenced in the wrong direction, and when you were talking about these different, projecting values onto other people, I call that the weaponization of compassion. So, and human rights is one that they do. Corruption is one that they recently started doing too, saying that they're going to tackle international corruption. So now all of a sudden they have the sovereignty to be able to arrest, which they did, a Venezuelan diplomat in an African country and ferry him over the U.S. to face charges for misappropriation of public funds in Venezuela. Like, what? And all while also lobbying to get one of the executives of Samsung released from prison. He was already convicted on fraud charges, released for getting the Korean government to release him, which they did eventually, because he was the only person that could sign off on a $17 billion chip factory deal for the U.S. So I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's really important to highlight the U.S. tries to find whatever way possible to utilize organizations, people, causes to create unrest in a certain country. So you see that the NBA has this much influence in China. You can be sure that this is a possible angle. Now, bringing up some of those problematic things that he is caught up in. Let's see if we've got some stuff here. So previously, Turkey had an arrest warrant out on him, suspected of being part of a terror organization. And connections to the cleric you mentioned. So let's see here where it goes on. It's right here saying he was there with him during the failed coup attempt. And then let's find out a little bit more about this fella. All right, so he was this was the leading movement behind Turkey's current Islamic Renaissance. He had been working with the CIA in regards to radicalization of Central Asia, using large amounts of money for these movements. And then let's see a little bit more about what these kinds of organizations do. So further down it says, with regards to the separatist moves over Xinjiang, according to Turk Pulse, one of the main tools Washington is using in this affair in order to get Turkey involved in the Xinjiang affair is some Turkish Americans, primarily the Fethullah Gulen. Did I pronounce that correctly?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then if you look at Ennis himself, I mean, come on, like, Marco Rubio,
freedom
from the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, one of the most anti-China organizations, or come on, like this is like
Mr.
with Bolton.
Elmer Fudd himself, yes.
Yeah, Elmer Fudd. They're one of the biggest war hawks in the U.S. Like, it's like, come on,
right?
Really?
And there's another one where he's posing with 8 representatives from APAC and Bahrain and the UAE. These total shining examples of democracy, right? These repressive, monarchist, colonialist regimes, which Ennis Cantor has no problem with. He's not talking about them. He's not talking, he is very close with Israel. I mean, you can see all over his Twitter timeline interviews with Israeli media, and Gulen, his mentor, is very close with Israel. He criticized during the Gaza flotilla in the early 2000s. He criticized those activists who were bringing food and supplies to Gaza, saying that they should have spoken to the Israeli authorities first. I mean, this is Ennis Cantor's mentor. This is his version of freedom, and he's jumped on the anti-China bandwagon big time. And I want to just say really quick in relation to the NBA why it's so important for this new Cold War that the United States wants to wage against China and is waging against China. The NBA is more than 70% black. And in the last summer, summer of 2020, actually, I interviewed David West, former NBA player, and he said straight forward that NBA players don't have this view about China. They don't believe, and they have a lot of influence over the black community. I mean, they're members of the black community. They're prominent people. They're seen all the time. Part of this effort to try to summon the NBA is not just about the business investments and trying to use those business investments as a political chip in this new Cold War, but it's also about trying to move what has been the most anti-war section of the U.S. population in a direction of supporting war, because that's just historic. I mean, the Black Panther Party went to China before Richard Nixon went to China. And not many people know that, but the Black Panther Party went on a delegation, the first of its kind, before Richard Nixon even went to begin the process of normalization.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, when LeBron James, before he came out and said something so simple, just saying, I don't think we have enough information on Hong Kong, he got so much backlash.
Yes,
That was something you're not allowed to say. And he got backlash from it in his own country. That's what takes bravery, is to say something somebody's not willing to say and say, hang on a sec, guys. You know, even just something so nuanced like that, you get attacked. Now people are celebrating Ennis as this hero. Oh, he's willing to say this stuff. No, he's jumping onto the anti-China bandwagon. He's jumping into an industry which he could potentially retire into after, which is very, very lucrative also. I don't really watch basketball. I'm not sure if he's a mediocre basketball player or anything like that. I'm not sure if you know anything more than me, but whatever. It's like, yeah. It's not this big thing saying, wow, you're so brave. No, you're just jumping onto a bandwagon and potentially being directed by these forces. So if you look at these problematic connections, and people are just lapping it up. And he's going to, whatever, I think he's going to start selling his, I'm not sure if those sneakers, human rights sneakers he's putting up are sneakers that he wants to sell.
They're ugly. No one's going to buy those.
Yeah, I know. They're pretty bad. I think it's designed by that. There's an Australian Chinese guy, and he does a lot of this stuff.
Perfect.
Very mediocre stuff. And I got blocked by him for saying it was mediocre. But yeah, I mean, but then when you get into these other, I don't know if Clay Travis is also a sports commentator, but there's this guy, Clay Travis. He came out also.
Oh, he is,
and he was saying on, I'm not sure if it was CNN. Let me see if I have the video here, where he put out this really remarkable claim. And it was like, whoa, where did that come from? Let's see if I can play it.
Worth pointing out, and I just want to keep hammering this because I think it's one of the great untold stories in sports right now. There are many NBA players currently on the court with Chinese sneaker deals. When there was a conflict about Uyghur cotton, that is the Muslim minority in Xinjiang province, guys, China came out and said, not only are we going to continue with these slave labor camps, the Chinese sneaker companies came out and bragged that their shoes were made with Chinese slave labor to pick cotton, and NBA players are endorsing and wearing those sneakers on the court in NBA games right now. The fact that most in the media are ignoring this is a form of rank hypocrisy, and it needs to be discussed, debated, and it needs to change, quite frankly.
Really fascinating issue here. We're watching from afar and keep an eye on it.
Yeah, so Clay Travis, Clay Travis he's like the premier literal grifter of the Trump phenomenon. He is a sports commentator. He runs a program called Outkick. And this is, during the Trump administration, he was much more visible in the sense that he was like the leader in pushing a lot of these anti-China sports related narratives.
That was really remarkable. But what was very important from that was because up until now, all of these slave labor reports, especially from ASPI and stuff like that, they don't actually prove slave labor. Nobody's actually proved it. And on the contrary, when, even Nike said, we don't have any evidence of this, but we're going to be careful about it. We're going to make sure not to deal with these companies. Skechers, on the other hand, did an active investigation. They actually made unannounced videos to the factories implicated in the report, in the ASPE report, saying that they had forced labor, and they found no evidence of forced labor. There were people who did audits. So now, finally, we have something solid. This guy, Clay, is coming out and saying the Chinese companies admitted that they used forced Uyghur slave labor, and they bragged about it. Wow. Well, this is now we can put this issue to rest. We don't need to talk
Cat's
about
out
this
of the
anymore.
bag.
It's confirmed. Well, okay, let's see, Clay. Let me see if I can reach out to you and ask you for your source. I heard your call to action, Clay Travis. This must be debated and discussed. I'll help. Could you provide reference for when China said they'd continue using slave labor and sneaker companies bragged about using it? Those will be powerful tools to start with.
Indeed.
So, wow, absolutely. This is finally, we have the evidence we need.
The smoking gun. Where is it?
Yeah. Sure, bud. Here you go. Chinese sneaker companies are bragging about using slave labor cotton, and NBA players are endorsing those companies.
Himself.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Don't give it away. wait, just give me a second. Let me work up to it. So, all right, open the article. Boom. There we go. All right. They have pledged that they will continue to proudly use cotton produced from Muslim slave labor. There's the quote. All right. Who made the quote? Oh, hang on a second. It's Clay Travis 7 months ago. Let's take a zoom in. Who he's saying the source is? It's me. I'm the source.
Man.
So now I say, thanks, Clay. Your provided source is you. Hoping to get the original source on the slave labor admission, Nike never claimed slave labor, and Skechers' investigations contradicted it. The quote you found of companies admitting slave labor is huge. Could you help share it with us? So I shared this too, and it's saying that, obviously Nike never said that they had any evidence of slave labor, and on the contrary, Skechers specifically said they went and investigated it and found nothing. There were some companies who were even implicated in those reports who sued and got removed from those so-called slave labor reports. Let me see what else. Oh no! So that's it. That's his source, and I've been following up. I'm saying, hey, buddy, does your source, which is you of 7 months ago, have another original source, or that's where it ends? I mean, how ridiculous can this get?
It's so ridiculous, and it touches on another aspect of how racism fuels this anti-China propaganda. It touches on this image of China as like this completely low-wage slave labor force. I get it on Twitter all the time. People saying wages are so low. There's not even a concept of the currency differences in China for most people. Most people don't understand that if a worker is making 87,500, 88,000 RMB per annually, that's pretty good, even if it amounts to 12,000 or so, whatever US dollars. There's not even an understanding of that aspect, because people really do think, and this was, there was a time where China was a hub of a low wage labor. There were lots of poor workers, and that has changed a lot in recent decades. But this image, right, it conjures up a lot of this anxiety among especially the white American, white so-called working class, these anxieties about how China stole all their jobs. Oh, not only are they stealing all their jobs, but they're slave labor jobs over there now. Like that's how bad it is. They took our jobs, and the jobs are horrible jobs. Of course, all of this contradicts things like extreme poverty being eliminated and wages rising annually like they do in China, which things that the United States has yet to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. The reduction in the terrorism and extremism issue, uplifting people from poverty was an essential part of that. Multiple studies show that in an environment of poverty, it's far easier for people to fall into extremism. When the U.S. sanctions countries, they've openly admitted that it is to create social unrest, to get people to a point where they don't have their basic needs and they're discontent, and they rise up against their own government. That's what they're trying to do in Xinjiang. And it's not only about uprising, it's about trying to restore terrorism. And it goes hand in hand with ETIM being delisted as a terrorist organization and pretending that they don't exist. And even some people whitewashing them, saying, no, they never existed, even though there's literal video of U.S. generals admitting to bombing ETIM, Xinjiang Uyghur separatists in Afghanistan just a couple of years ago. Yes. And you got to understand, one of the most ironic things here is, or tragic things I should say, is that they are doing this. These people are trying to convince everyone they're doing this in the name of human rights. But what they're doing is they're allowing for institutionalized racism to make its way into China. They're the ones that are causing the racism, because now you've got a lot of Western companies that refuse to use factories that hire Uyghur workers. There are factories that are actively refusing to hire Uyghur workers because of the possible implications, because somebody can just say slave labor and they don't really need that much evidence to back it up with. And all of a sudden they're destroying this company. It's not worth the risk. So now they're putting Uyghurs out of jobs. They're putting racist policies in place while pretending to protect the Uyghurs. It's absolutely tragic,
Yeah, of course. And what you said about how poverty alleviation has actually reduced terrorism in China. Everywhere you see the United States go with sanctions or war, you see terrorism proliferate, whether it's Al Qaeda in Iraq and across the Middle East, even in a place like Venezuela, where sanctions are about how Venezuela represents this threat to U.S. national security, and the brutal Maduro government is violating all these human rights. Then you find out that the Garimbas, the literal right-wing fascists that the U.S. has poured millions of dollars into, has used the desperation of sanctions, has used this poverty that has been facilitated by U.S. sanctions to terrorize that very population, to literally go on massacres like they did in 2014, trying to attack Afro-Venezuelans and working-class Venezuelans for their support of the government. So that, I think that just says it all, is that this framework of human rights that the U.S. uses, it's all about trying to cultivate this image of a savior, that they are the savior, the United States is the savior, so that it can just achieve the objectives that it really has, which is hegemony, racism, dominance, and of course, ensuring that their business interests, corporate interests are always protected, that no one is allowed to compete.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not about human rights. I mean, it was Reagan that praised Rios Montt as a man of great personal integrity or something like that. And he was saying this while he knew the kinds of atrocities he was carrying out. And eventually Rios was convicted of actual genocide, literal genocide. I think it was the first in Latin America. And yeah, I mean, you can see that with how the U.S. picks and chooses its alliances as well. There's so much hypocrisy that people should be able to see through. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more stuff that comes up. But we're just passing the hour mark here. I wondered if you had anything else on your list you wanted to talk about. Obviously, we can always hook up again at any time to continue talking about these issues. But what else are you looking at? And if you didn't have anything else, what are your kind of what's on your table to look at kind of going forward? What are you covering?
Sure. So I'm actually working on. So there's I mean, we touched on a lot. I think one of the things to really look out for, I published an article in Black Agenda Report yesterday about Taiwan. That's another flashpoint that's actually escalating quite aggressively. And we can talk, maybe if you want to talk very rapidly, if you want to take a few minutes
tell
to
us
talk
a little bit about that, because I haven't looked at Taiwan as much as the other areas, but I think it's slipped my attention, and it definitely needs a lot more. I need to figure out a lot more about it. So I'm interested to hear your perspectives and what you found.
Well, with Taiwan, October has been a particularly hot month with regards to the U.S. propaganda war against China and China's relations with Taiwan, which is a part of China. They follow their own kind of one country, two systems model. But of late, especially in October, what we've heard over and over and over again from the U.S. media is that China is being aggressive. China's flying over Taiwan's airspace, right? And they talk about the air defense identification zone. If you look up the air defense identification zone, you'll find out pretty quickly that it was actually formulated by the United States after World War II. It's not recognized by international law, and it includes much of mainland China as well.
I think there's more mainland land on it than there is actual Taiwan land in the zone.
Exactly. And then you had, the Department of Defense came out Press Secretary John Kirby said that the U.S. is all in defending Taiwan from China's so-called pressure campaign, and then Canada, sorry Daniel, Canada and the United States did these this joint sail through the South China Sea with their warships. So that has led now to this ongoing effort by the United States, which began with Trump very directly through the Taipei Act, of pushing Taiwan into this nominal independence status. So without actually saying that Taiwan is going to be an independent country, we want it to be recognized at the United Nations. The United States has now taken the position that it wants Taiwan to be a joint participant in like the World Health Assembly and other international organizations, as really a political ploy to push what the local government in Taiwan is pushing, which is this separatist agenda, trying to use Taiwan as a military base through this effort for so-called independence. I mean, it's a complete violation of the One China policy, a complete violation of the 1992 consensus, of the 3 joint communiques that have been agreed upon since the 1970s, and of international law itself, because the United Nations recognizes the People's Republic of China as China and Taiwan to be a part of the People's Republic of China. So that, in summary, I think what we are seeing is that the United States is attempting to use Taiwan, and it's doing quite a good job of this, use Taiwan as a de facto military base. It's already sent billions of dollars since the Trump administration of military weapons, a couple of billion now, and counting, of military weaponry to Taiwan. There's reports that special forces are training Taiwan's so-called military. There are some unfortunate aspects for Taiwan, in the sense that there are reports that actually that training is like sweeping up garbage, right? Like that. This is a grave, probably, miscalculation for anyone in Taiwan who's on the side of separatism and going along with the U.S.'s new Cold War. But nonetheless, this is the general trend. And we have to remember that Taiwan has always been a key aspect of U.S. policy towards China, dating all the way back to the 1950s, when the United States used Taiwan under the KMT at that time as a sort of chip against China's rightful recognition, both internationally and also just as a country itself under a socialist government. I mean, that Daniel Ellsberg revealed that the United States was so committed to trying to use Taiwan in this way that it threatened nuclear war over this issue, over the so-called Taiwan Straits crisis, as it was called back then.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really unfortunate, because if there was any hope of maintaining the status quo, which I think a lot of people would have been happy with, that seems to be diminishing really quickly. I mean, even from the language in China, you get the sense that they're preparing to need to have to deal with the certain red lines that were never supposed to be crossed. In order to maintain the status quo, there are certain things that you don't do. And it seems like the U.S. is trying to push all of those buttons, get as close to that red line as possible, where, I just really hope that things can renormalize. And when you think about the situation with the tensions between the U.S. and China, and in this environment of tensions, when you're supposed to be saying, okay, well, let's not do anything stupid while we've got all these differences working up. No, the U.S. is sending warships over into this region. I can guarantee you, even if China has the legal right to go and sail around the Caribbean with their warships, or over in that area of the world, it doesn't matter if they have the legal right to do it too. You could only imagine, in this current climate, how that would be perceived, what it would be considered an act of, and how the people of America would respond, especially when they've had this kind of anti-China propaganda ramped up on them. They would start looking for people under their beds again, just like before, I mean,
Exactly.
It would be absolute chaos.
Yeah, what the United States is doing in the South China Sea in relation to Taiwan, just in the Asia Pacific in general, is like if China sent warships to the Gulf of Mexico and started sailing, along the border of Texas. I mean, that's how dangerous this is that it really
Right.
is a direct provocation. And I think sometimes in the United States, especially, although it seems kind of strange that this would be the case, there's an underestimation of how much influence the military-industrial complex really has. So even as these officials, the trade representative, Catherine Tai, talking Chinese envoy, diplomats, so-called diplomats, State Department to me is not diplomatic, but supposedly diplomats coming together, U.S., China, right? There's these talks that are happening. Biden and Xi Jinping are supposed to talk before the end of the year. But even then, you see the CIA shifting and saying, well, China is the biggest threat to the so-called rules-based international order. It's the biggest threat to the U.S.'s national security interest. And then you have these moves happening with regard to Taiwan at the same time that these talks are happening. Just shows you how strong the influence of the military industrial complex is, that this is money, this is profit for these military contractors. They're already crying about losing that profit because of the US's so-called withdrawal in Afghanistan. They're looking to balance the spreadsheet. They're looking to balance their bottom line, and China is a huge part of that in this new Cold War. And China is a huge part of that. It's why you see Taiwan. Taiwan is not an independent country. It has received more than $2 billion since 2019 from the United States in military arms deals. I mean, that's so egregious, but it just shows how the military-industrial complex sees any aspect of this new Cold War as an opportunity to make enormous profit.
Absolutely, and that is that's something I spoke about in my chat too. I'm just trying to pull something up here as you're speaking about it. But there was, I think it was from Raytheon. They came out and they were kind of complaining how their profits are down. And let's see here. Let's see if this pulls up here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they said, oh, oh no, a $75 million impact for leaving leaving Afghanistan. And I reposted that. I said, oh, poor Greg. I'm sure he'll figure it out. But when you look at these industries, I mean, first of all, zooming out, the fact that military industrial complex can lobby in government, they can have, they can support senators and things like that. That's a very, very scary conflict of interest to begin with. But then you got these think tanks too, like ASPI. The first image I shared when I retweeted that was this. Somebody had posted this. Once weapons were manufactured to fight wars, now wars are manufactured to sell weapons. But you look at this, ASPI, these are some of their funders. ASPI is in Australia. They're responsible for influencing, whether they're responsible or not, they do influence public opinion and public policy, regularly involved in government panels as well. And if you look at the 20 companies that profited the most from the Afghan war and from Iraq, they're recycling their profits into ASPI, pushing this think tank, which is manufacturing China threat stories, and then profiting from the China threat prevention to counteract against those threats that they just finished manufacturing. And they also, ironically, put out reports about prison or slave labor in China, while a very large portion of the parts from those military contractors are made with U.S. prison labor. It's just I mean, there's aspects of what's going on that just seriously should be a comedy of some sort. It should be some sort of a modern day, Monty Python 2.0 that we just imagine these things happening. But no, this is reality. It's like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, no, and ASPI, the way that they benefit from war and militarism in the military-industrial complex is so deep that this kind of went under the radar. But after the U.S., Australia, the U.K. announced AUKUS, this new so-called military deal where in like 40 years, Australia will get nuclear submarines from the United States or something like that. But after that happened, ASPI actually was able to open an office in Washington, D.C. It now has a branch there directly after that deal occurred. So that's how connected ASPI is to anything that the United States and the military industrial complex as a whole does, regardless of whatever Western country we're talking about, Australia especially, because the Defense Department, Australia, State Department, United States directly funds ASPI as well. They are literally the think tank that does the principal bidding. I mean, they are the face of, I think, the propaganda war against China.
You know, within our circle of friends, most of our friends and people we know from Australia know who ASPI are. But when you go out into the general public, the average person doesn't know. You know, I got a lot of friends in Australia who I don't speak about politics. They didn't even know until a few days ago that I have a YouTube channel. But I asked them about ASPI if they know who ASPI is, and they're like, no. And when I explained, they're like, whoa. You know, if the average person knew the mechanics of how ASPI worked, who they were funded by, what they're doing, what they're pushing Australia towards, I mean, the average person would be like, holy crap, this is very important information to disclose to the public. And there's no real media outlets. I confronted ABC about this before too. I'm like, have you ever like tried to really expose this and push this? They're like, yeah, we understand there's a conflict of interest there. Can you send me some examples of that? Silence. You know, more people need to know about this. I mean, it's absolutely, like I said, it should be a comedy, and a dark comedy at that. But at bare minimum, people should realize that this is what's going on.
Yeah, well, it's like
Yeah.
the National Endowment for Democracy here in the United States. Very few people know what that is. Those who don't follow these issues that I know have no idea what the NED is and how it uses U.S. tax dollars funneled directly from Congress to essentially do what the CIA did in secret, you know, out in the open, and supporting all of these far right movements, some of them being outright fascist movements like in Ukraine, in order to achieve the US's foreign policy objectives.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how attention is diverted. How people know, you know, a large percentage of the population knew when Jack Ma went missing for a little while. You know, it was everywhere. It's like, oh no, what's happened to him? Or if a journalist, you know, doesn't show up for a while, oh no, in China there's a journalist that we haven't heard from this journalist in a while, and most of them have no idea what's going on with the Julian Assange case. You know, they're theorizing about what may or may not be happening in China, people who may or may not be missing who eventually show up, but know nothing about what is actually happening. The incredibly unethical things that their government is engaged in on a daily basis. It's completely backwards, and it goes back to the idea that somebody wouldn't want to fix that first before saying, we're going to start virtue signaling to the world, and you should adopt our system, which we still haven't figured out how to make work properly and still causes human rights abuses, just like you do. But unlike you, they're not only domestic, they're global. You know, it's completely ridiculous. But I think we covered a lot of stuff. And like I said, we can follow up more. So is there anything you wanted to end on, or you wanted to put people's attention towards where they can find your work?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, actually tomorrow, which tomorrow would be October 29th, I'm relaunching a program that I had planned to do last year, but because I was working full time, plus I was unable to do it, called the Internationalist Transmission. You can find that on the Left Lens YouTube channel. So please do subscribe to that. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because everything we're talking about at this core of it, we're talking about the United States' foreign policy, the West's foreign policy, and how that really cements these very dehumanizing racist ideas that help justify all of it, this propaganda. And so this program will be dedicated to talking to those who are focusing on this, who are doing activism, doing journalism. I'll probably be calling on you and others who live in China to talk about just that experience, because there is this dehumanization aspect of this propaganda war, which really does disallow any kind of real solidarity, and it also stops real political action, real activity and resistance to the U.S.'s foreign policy and the West's foreign policy in general. You can find me on Black Agenda Report nearly weekly. I do some op-ed work with China Global Television Network, which you know well, Daniel. And Yeah, and if you're able to support my work, you can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. And that's kind of how I'm monetarily sustaining this work. So yeah, that's essentially where you can find me. And lastly, you were Daniel, you were a speaker at Friends of Socialist China's propaganda war event. We are actually doing, so keep a lookout for some of these things. We're going to do a summit on socialist democracy. So we are going to be holding that in December during the time where Joe Biden has this summit for democracy that he's going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a counter summit. So look out for that. Subscribe to Friends of Socialist China. You can find that at socialistchina.org.
That sounds good. And this video is going to go up in a couple of days. So that link you mentioned at the beginning will be out and available by then already. And I'll put the details for your channel in the description. And we will chat more next time. But thank you very much for joining once again, Danny Haiphong.
Thank you so much.